nice to have, so good to have everyone this morning. You know, the beautiful thing about the scriptures is that each time I read it, I read a chapter, I will see something a little bit different, or even sometimes in a little bit different light. So last week we did a review of the first four chapters that Dennis had done. And then we got into chapter 5. Didn't quite get it done as to our liking, and there were a couple questions, so I wanted to plow that ground again a little bit and give anybody that has any questions an opportunity to cover those. And then we'll go into chapter 6. Okay, what is the problem in as chapter 5, 1 Corinthians 5 begins? What does Paul talk about right away? The sexually immoral brother. Am I right about that? Okay. What does he say must be done in verse 3? He's rendered judgment, and so he's reminding the church that they have the same responsibility. Why is that? As he goes on in verses 6 through 8. Okay, Jack, somebody's up.
Unity and pursuing Christ together. You can't do that when there's sin in your midst that you're actively really encouraging.
Okay. He's also, along with that, reminding them to purge the leaven. And why is that important, to purge the leaven? A little leaven leavens the whole lump, right? And so he's reminding them of that and their responsibility to do that for the sake of everyone and for the sake of the church at large. We must confront sin and error as it faces us, and sometimes are more difficult than others. What does this not mean in terms of we're to reject the erring brother, but in what way?
Salvation.
Okay, good. Okay, that's the right word. Restore. Jennifer?
Humility, lest you also be tempted.
Okay.
Because if you go in it above instead of low, then that's a disaster.
Okay, good. All right, that's along with what I'm thinking as well. The other thing that's important is that we realize that it does not mean that we are to withdraw from the world. We still have to live in the world. We have to associate with people outside of the church. And with what goal? Is it not to teach those? If we withdraw ourselves fully from the world, we see adultery and fornication and all matters of sin every day. You'll see this, I'll see that. It frustrates us, but along with that, God gives us opportunity, doesn't he? He gives us opportunity to teach those who are lost. And if we completely withdraw from the world itself, then we're not going to affect those people. We have to befriend someone before we can teach them. So, but looking at it from the standpoint of a brother, that's a totally different issue that we've got to face. we've got to confront sin in the church as it appears, so that what? We can restore them to their first love, as Hebrews chapter 6 talks about. So, but in the process of that, he talks about, in verse 11, he talks about not eating with those who are erring. Is that a difficult situation? What about families? It's very hard to face those issues. And I don't have a magic pill on that. And I don't have a magical wand that I can wave to make that better. But there are different extenuating circumstances for folks, maybe in families who err. Maybe it's mental illness, maybe it's other issues that. So each instance is the same, but generally speaking, like Proverbs, you know, everything is not black or white. So I do want to point that out, that we have to know the circumstance in those situations. But it is important for us to communicate to those who have fallen away, and as Hebrews 6 so eloquently describes it, lost their first love, that things are not the same between you and them, between them and the church. It's not something that you can gloss over. It's not something that we want to gloss over, because at the fundamental principle is the salvation of that person's soul. When they are erring and especially bringing sin and reproach upon the church, it's critical that we implore them, encourage them to come back and make that right. Jack?
I don't want to jump ahead too much, so if this is just stop me, but that distinction Paul makes in verse 11, right, with anyone who bears the name of brother, I think that is it's so telling why Paul's coming down so hard on this individual and on this congregation, because like he says in verses 12 and 13, if they're outside the church, right, we already know their situation, we know they're outside, we're trying to bring them in, that's nothing new. But if someone's going to say, I'm a Christian, but they're going to live in sin, and you all are going to see that he's living in sin, and just be okay with it, that's when we start to have, that's a major issue that we have to confront in a very, probably some would call it extreme way. Yeah. But it takes drastic measures, right? Like not going so far as to eat with such a one, because if you're going to bear the name of Christ and simultaneously drag it through the mud, then we can't, I can't be party to that.
Okay, very good. Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. What is the opinion of people that if it's a son in that family, a son or a daughter, how does that apply here?
Well, that's what I was talking about. That's not easy. And I don't have a magic wand to be able to say that every situation is the same, because it isn't. But with respect to generally recognize, I think all of us must draw a fair conclusion on that, is that there's a reason why this passage is written and the way it's written. And I know of families that do associate with those that are erring, and I know families that don't. And if you, and that's why I said earlier, once you err and you go off into into another lifestyle. Things are not the same. And so if you use your time with that person to talk about where they are and maybe where they're going, then I think that's fruitful. But in terms of letting down the gauntlet and saying it's okay and we can forget about what you're doing with respect to the church, use that wisely in that way. Phil, yes.
There's a connection that Paul's talking about here with those who are among the Corinthians.
Okay.
That's part of the equation. That's not the end all necessarily, but this is not talking about withdrawing from somebody who lives in California who has fallen away. It's probably good advice not to hang around people who are immoral and who are going to cause you problems. I mean, somebody who causes dissension, Romans 16,
Yeah.
16 and 17 is, stay away from those people that are like that. Here, it's stay away from those people who are openly engaging in sin and not willing to repent. You've got to make a line of distinction when they're trying to be among you. Now, here's a question that comes up. What is our practice, or what have we seen over the years so often when it comes to withdrawal? Almost always it's somebody who has stopped attending, and several months later after they stopped attending, we send a letter to them, and I use the we accommodatively there, but saying, oh, you're being withdrawn from. Well, that's a joke.
Yeah.
Because
It's already too late.
the group, they're no longer part of
Right.
it.
Their decision has long been made. So, but I was going to say something else. But Jack, did you have something along the lines of what Phil's talking about?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. I saw your hand up. I got a little sidetracked. So, okay.
Difference between a church family and a church here, I think.
Right, and I think the other thing that I think Phil was getting at is for those in our midst. I think he's talking about those in our midst. But it's still, the principle is still the same. Okay, we need to not be comfortable with acting like even though they're not in our midst, everything is okay. So, but lines of communication should always be left open to those who are erring. Jennifer?
This is kind of a different direct, I mean,
Okay.
I just kind of had a question on, like verse 7 and 8. Since you are truly unleavened, for indeed Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So my question is kind of like, in this context even, this kind of stands out to me like I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about. So what is the leaven of malice? Or what would be the leaven of sincerity in this context?
Anybody have a thought on it? Dennis? Dennis is no.
Well, there's no leaven at all.
Okay.
I mean, the unleavened period, and he lists several things that you might have a leaven of. A leaven here is something that's going to be a bad influence on everybody else. And so lest the little leaven leaven the whole lump, purge yourselves from the leaven. Just in the likeness here is at Passover, they had to put leaven out of their household.
Completely or
So if you've got malice, that leaven needs to be purged. If you've got these other issues, that leaven needs to be purged. You need to be pure and unleavened before God.
So I guess what would malice look like in this situation, I guess is my question. Because he's calling it out and saying don't have it, but what would it be?
Dennis, what do you
I'll jump in.
What do you think?
So I think Jennifer's question is such a good question because it's really, really challenging. But I think what I see Paul doing here is like he does in so many other passages, where he is really trying to get this congregation to understand that what they're doing, right, is so we know there's sexual immorality. It's horrific, and he says that they're boasting about it, right? So their attitude is let's just be arrogant and prideful about it. And so what he's doing is he's addressing this and saying, not only is that it's such an extreme case. Like what you're doing is not just a bad idea. This is horrifically wrong, and it is evil. And it's very interesting that we've raised this question here about like what about in like a family relationship even? Like what about when this situation here extends even to like my family, right? My kids or whatever. And I guess there's a lot of different thoughts we could bring together here, but it's almost like he is saying, I think probably he is saying, that in reality what you're doing is you're hating this person by simply allowing them to sit around and be in sin, and you're all okay with that, and you're claiming, oh, look how tolerant we are, and look how, maybe they're saying, look how loving we are. And it's like you are hating their soul because you're condemning them to destruction by your actions here. You really want to show the love of Christ? This needs to be a hard line, and it needs to be purged from your midst. And it's no joke that he brings in this allusion to the Passover. If you didn't do that and sweep out the leaven from your house, you were dead. I mean, that wasn't like, oh, we did a poor job. He's like, no, that was part of it. And if you did not follow the rules, you would be cut off. And he's making that same point here. It's like you can't just like let some leaven lay around and think it's okay. You know, the leaven that needs to be there is a sincere love for God, which means we're going to take an absolute stand against sin in whatever form it has.
Good. Thank you. Does that answer your question?
It's something to consider.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
The question of how to treat family, there are specific responsibilities that we have towards our family, especially parents towards children. Keep them fed, take care of them. But in this context, there's no distinction made for family. I can think of this one, 2 Thessalonians 3. I can think of Galatians 6 especially applies. It would apply to family. We want to restore such one in the spirit of gentleness.
Right.
So,
But in order to do that, we have to keep lines of communication open.
absolutely.
But as I said a little earlier, let them know that everything isn't all right the way it is right now. Okay, Jack, now you do.
A little along those lines, I think what we see in 1 Corinthians 5 here is a lot where we have to consider the intent of the individual a lot, and our intent. We brought up that word malice. I mean, the term malice specifically applies to one's intent, right? If you're a malicious person, the term means to intend to do evil. And so when we're talking about this idea of who are we separating ourselves from, right? It's not just someone who, well, my son has been really questioning his faith recently and he's having some struggles, so I'm going to stop, I'm going to disassociate with him. We're not talking about light situations, kind of like Dad brought up. We're talking about extreme situations where people's intent is to do wrong, and they are set on that path. And so kind of going along with, what we just said about there's no distinction made for family here, that the point is somebody has set themselves on a path so extreme, so devoted to doing evil, that we have no other choice. There's no other recourse to say, well, I can't be with you. And while that is obviously in some situations going to be very difficult, in many instances I would say that those people who they're set on that path, want to be evil, they don't really want to be around us either most of the time, right? If we're unified and seeking Christ, those paths can't conjoin, they can't be one.
Okay, good. That'd be good. Bill?
No, we're not gonna let you get to chapter 6.
That's okay.
I'm just thinking of going back to the beginning of this chapter, sexual immorality. We don't often see a man with his son's wife. In fact, I've never seen that churches in general
Right.
have given up on this entirely, and the scriptures have not.
Okay, good. That's a very good thought. Okay, I read something this morning, I did want to bring this out, and it said, love doesn't ignore sin, it restores the sinner. And that's really what we need to keep in mind as we go about daily living and we're involved with, especially with other members of the church. We need to try to restore that center. Sort of in conclusion, um, James chapter 5, verses 19 and 20. You might turn over and just take a quick look at that. In that passage, it talks about the importance of turning the wanderer back to God. And that's our fundamental goal, is to bring that person back. And then in 2 Thessalonians 3, verse 6, and then 14 and 15, does anybody have that? Second Thessalonians 3, verse 6. Got it, Jack? Read it, and then 14 and 15.
Walking in idleness and not in accord with the traditions that you received from us. Verse 14, if anyone does not obey what we say in this letter, take note of that person and have nothing to do with him, that he may be ashamed. Do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother.
Okay, that's really the two things that I want you to take away from this, is that we need to recognize the sin, deal with the sin, but restore the sinner. That's the goal. Okay, then I wanted to talk about two passages. The James passage, James chapter 5, verses 19 and 20. Dennis, can you get to that, please? Or if anybody has. Yeah, James chapter 5, 19 and 20.
My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins.
Okay, that passage is talking about public sin in the church. But then if you look at the Matthew 18 passage, where it talks about differences between brothers, there are sort of two different circumstances. And I just want you to recognize that as you apply this, that there are different circumstances. However, you still maybe end up at the same, drawing the same conclusion. And that conclusion is, if in the Matthew 18 passage where it talks about disagreements between brothers, which may lead to sin or confrontation, then you go to that person privately and try to work out those issues. If they won't listen, then you take two or more with you, try to work out those things, and then if they still won't listen, you bring it to the church. Okay, sorry.
Add on, both of those instances, you see some kind of action.
Right.
And so I think it's important to note that, because it's never just sit around, hopefully it works itself out.
Yeah.
A lot of times, often we sit around with the sin work itself out, and we can kind of talk about it after it's all dealt with. But with an action here, it's telling us, we need to restore that person. We need to confront that person about the sin that's in their lives, so that we can
So both are action, they're both scriptures with action steps, is what you're saying, right? Okay, good. All right. Yeah.
The passages that we looked at necessitate that there's a healthy relationship between brethren. Or I would say, if we're in each other's lives and we're talking and we believe in each other and we're worshiping with each other, you know, like if I've never gone out to eat with you ever, right, then it's not going to be a big deal if we stop. You know, you say, well, you're not going to go out. You know, it's implying. So I would just say, what a great blessing it is that we have a congregation with brethren that love to be with one another, and that if we can continue to talk and to worship together and to spend time together, a lot of these other problems are going to either be solved quickly or we're going to be able to help each other. So I see and hear the need for us as a congregation to just continue to be involved in one another's lives. And in doing that, we're helping prevent one another from falling into sin. We're confessing sins to one another. We're teaching. We're encouraging. And then there's no miscommunication too, because we just know, it's like, I know my brother and he loves me, and let's talk about it. So I guess there's an emphasis on healthy, faithful relationships.
Good. You gotta go.
Something I was thinking about when reading 1 Corinthians 5 that is just pretty sad is like, you know, in a lot of churches, and in history it could be the Church of Christ, or just like churches across the board, a lot of times, sometimes a person who is doing all these things is like the preacher. And people have experienced like sexual abuse and forms of abuse from like the church leader, and then been, you know, ostracized or isolated for standing up or speaking out about that. And I don't know if, you know, there could be hurt there, but just like that, God and Paul, it's our responsibility to stand up about those things, or like knowing that, you know, abuse is happening in families, and just like that, you're right to do that and to take a stand against that. And I don't know if anyone has experienced that in other churches or in their life, you know, but people carry that and then are felt like they can be treated like they're the problem. And just have experiences as almost like they've been ostracized and treated like we're supposed to treat that person. You know, maybe it's helping people. So I don't know. I just
Sad.
Yeah.
Okay, Jen.
Well, to do with that, it's like a combination of thinking about Matthew 18 and this together. In Matthew 18, it does say, if a brother sins against you, then go to that person. And here, obviously, there is sin being taken place very publicly. And I don't know, I wonder, like, why don't we confront it? So it's like, if you would confront it when it was the small thing of, oh, you know, I heard you were talking mean about me, and that really bothered me. If you confront it at that level, then maybe it doesn't become the big monster. But we don't do it, and I don't know why. I think it's like fear of conflict, or maybe cowardice on some level. I'm just not sure, but I feel like if we would confront it when it's small and just between me and you, then maybe it doesn't grow into
I think part of that is discomfort. Most of us don't like confrontation. And sometimes ever how small. And as you say, that's not good. Because if you start out, you handle it small. Nobody else is involved. We can take care of it between the two of us. But it doesn't, I can't give you a magical answer. But Mark,
I think it's because of the fear of retaliation from the other person. You know, it's like, it's just like today on social media, people have what they call, what I call screen courage. They have a screen in front of them, so the person can't
said, instead of talking about, you're really talking about it with others. You shouldn't do that. You should talk about it with the person. And that's what people are doing online. They're impersonalizing something that's personal. And that is, it's dangerous because in your realm of people that you associate with, they may, somebody else is going to pick up on what you're talking about.
The uncomfortableness, I think, is part of the temptation to not obey this. Things we're not doing at this point. I mean, before they should have been taken steps, as we've mentioned, that this shouldn't have gotten this far, but if it did, then they should have resolved it. But going up to somebody, talking to them, is very uncomfortable. And for me, I'm tempted to just avoid it, so that I don't, go through that discomfort. That's something that we have to kind of strengthen ourselves and do what God says, even though it's uncomfortable.
I know it's not, it's uncomfortable. It's not easy. Go ahead.
Going back to the words used in verse 8, I think it really helps us individually and as a congregation. Though the unleavened bread and sincerity be true. It is uncomfortable to go talk to someone or on a personal level, congregational level. When you go ahead and give the heart and pursue to be sincere between two people or sincere within a congregation, it does bring about God's effect, because in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, that man repented, and he said, I urge you to reaffirm your love to him. And we see the Corinthians repented, and he talks later in chapter 2, or 2 Corinthians, he talks about their zeal and their godly sorrow. So God's way works. Sometimes you got to do the heart, but pursue that sincerity. People will appreciate that and help them come back to a place of sincerity between them and God.
I think you bring up a really good point when you use the word sincerity. If you're sincere toward your brother, that goes a long way in them recognizing that you're not out with a club to try to beat them up. You're just sincere about it. You're not, trying to damage them, but you're doing it for your own personal good and theirs. So that's a good thing. Okay, good. All right. My last point with respect to this chapter is we know the reason why we move toward withdrawing from folks is to save the sinner. Verse 5. We want to save that person. That's our, by rejecting them, hopefully it brings them to a point where they are going to realize that they need to make a change. And especially in a public sin like this. This is a horrible circumstance because this sin in particular that Paul's talking about in chapter 5, even the Gentiles wouldn't touch it. So this is an awful circumstance. But all sin is bad and something that we need to talk and deal with. So anyway, but I think the way he goes about it is good. But remembering, like he talked about in the passage, it's better to destroy the flesh and save the soul. And that's the bottom line, is to do that. Also, I was looking at James chapter 5, verses 19 and 20. There we're not talking about retribution. We're just talking about saving that person. And then obviously redemption in Hebrews chapter 6, verses 4 through 6 tells us how we need to what the steps are in coming back. And so best outcome in this circumstance, in this sin, in any sin that affects the church negatively, is for the restoration of the individual and setting a pattern for the local church, a pattern of purity that we should be expected to hold to. And you had brought up 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 3 to 11. I think he may have been talking in 2 Corinthians, he may have been talking about this instance. I don't know. But that's certainly a possibility. So anyway, any other questions? Anything else that you see that, okay, Ethan?
I've been thinking about, throughout this entire discussion, there's like two things that are just like replaying in my mind. One is the powerful character of God that he shows over and over and over and over and over again to the entire Bible is he is willing to go to the utmost. He's willing to sacrifice everything to restore connection with his people.
Okay.
Like anything and everything. Whether it's when we were talking about the Passover, that's part of the Exodus story. God is going to get his people out of slavery, right? Or he's going to go after the one, right? He's going to drop everything and go after the one, right? And that is just so important to remember, like, over this entire discussion is God was willing to go through everything to restore connection with you, right? And restore from the brokenness of sin. And so I just think that's so important to remember as we're talking about all of this. And then I was thinking about a story where friends bring their paralyzed friends to Jesus, and like they're gonna do everything they can and rip a hole in the roof to help their brother heal, right? And bring him to Jesus. And I was just thinking about both of those things, and as we're talking about this, I just wanted to share.
Yeah, I think that's a good thought. Yeah, to the extent people will go to save their brother, we should be willing to go to those extremes to save our brother when he or she is off in dangerous territory. But the key to any of these circumstances are catching it early. If you know someone is involved in a behavior, go to them right away. The sooner the better, before they become entrenched in it. Yeah. Don't give up is what you're saying, right, Ethan? Okay. All right. Anybody else have anything that you think is pertinent? Okay, well, that's the things that I wanted to talk about. And for us, as far as modern day application, one thing, sin isn't just personal. It affects the entire church. And both, we're accountable to God, but we're also accountable to one another. And so we need to think about that as we face these circumstances. And we need to protect both the purity and the way our example is shown to the community. Okay, one. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry if I missed it.
No, you're good. I was just since we were talking about the purpose of this is to restore the sinner. I've been in some centers where sometimes people talk about withdrawing from others, and they, sometimes there's almost this vindictive or gleeful tone, as if like, oh, they're sin, we're happy to cut these people out, and and we get to wash our hands of them and not work with them, and whatever happens to them, they get what they deserve. It's kind of there's a lot of I hear a lot of people talk like that kind of tone. I think it's important to remember we always want to be continuing to try and bring them back because we continue to love them. The love doesn't stop when we withdraw from them, right?
I think you use a good word when you use the word heartbreaking. It is it's heartbreaking to God based on the sacrifice of Jesus, and it should be heartbreaking to us to lose a brother or a sister back to the world. So, okay. I think
Sorry, so along with that, the balance of that is that we have to consider ourselves lest we also be tempted. And the fact that we can't compel, God has compel us to obey. We can't compel someone else to obey. So there's a point where we have to be available, but not actively pursue them. If they are just like, go away, we're just going to chase them farther away. If we go with love, with gentleness, but we're also concerned about our own self. That's an important balance.
And we need to remember, while they may be a member of our congregation, they're not our property. They are first a son or daughter of God, and we're instruments working on God's behalf to help bring them back to God. But if that person is still God's son or God's daughter who's lost, and we need to approach that with caution, with love, and with care. And when they are broken about it, we see it from God's eyes.
hate the sin, love the sinner.
That's what I was.
Oh, were you? Okay, good. Sorry. Sorry, I got ahead of you. Okay. Appreciate the discussion this morning. I hope we cleared up some issues that might have been hanging out. And next week, we'll get together with Dennis. We'll decide what to do about chapter 6.